Thank you so much for joining me this morning, David.
My
Welcome,
pleasure. Having
welcome
me.
to my Flutarians who are tuning in live and also on the replay. I'm welcoming today David Reed, the author of this book, Improvise for Real. I hope a few of you have heard of it. I know a few of you Flutarians have actually joined me in a book club for this a couple of months ago. We read the whole book together, and I'm so glad that I had a few friends and students to hold me accountable to make sure that I read the whole book and to share my basically reviews and perceptions of the book. So I'll just tell you a tiny bit about me, and then I would love to hear more about the backstory of the book. So when I went to college, music college, I got super burned out on the competition of being at. I went to UNT, the biggest public music college in the States, or at least one of the top two, and I quit playing mostly. But I rediscovered flute through improvisation. I would be listening to the radio, and my dad's favorite songs would come on, and I would feel like I needed to sing my heart out because actually my dad passed away while I was in college, and so that just created a perfect storm for a burnout. And I felt, oh, well, I'm a better flute player than I am a singer. So I'd get out my flute and I would just start freely improvising with these classic rock tunes. Think Beatles and Eagles and that sort of thing. And then after I moved to Austin, Texas, and eventually kind of came out of my shell and met a few other musicians, they started inviting me to come out, and I was playing improvised music, sound baths, kirtans, folk rock, that sort of thing. And
Hmm.
people started asking me where do I teach, and I wasn't teaching at all. And so fast forward a couple of years and I created this group on Facebook, the Flutarians group, which is to help flute players who are mostly classically trained improve their improvising and to reap all these benefits from it, like not just better intonation and better classical technique and stuff, but also um, the benefits of mindfulness meditation and of being able to express yourself in a new way. So, one of the first things that I noticed about your book was that you made this connection with the idea of Zen or meditation and, and improvisation. So, I'm I'm sure we could talk all day about improv. There are so many things I loved in your book, but I would love to hear a little bit about the origin story. And I would love to also applaud you on just making an attempt to write a book about improvisation because I know how challenging it can be to take something that's in musical time and try and put it in words, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, wow. I'm really fascinated by the experience you had at UNT. I think that for the human mind, it's difficult to grasp just how pluralistic our society is or our world is. And it's so easy, especially for musicians who think of themselves um, as still learning. They think of themselves as students, as beginners, or whatever. It's so easy for them to see kind of one institution of the way some people are teaching and studying music, and it just our tribal identity kicks in, and we just think, well, that's what the tribe does. If I want to play music, I have to do what they do. And it can take a while to find your path in music and to discover that these institutions that teach music in a certain way, they're getting feedback, right? They're getting this reinforcement of the way they're doing things, and it attracts students who need exactly that thing, and so it just makes the school even more the way it is. And it can take a while to discover that there's a whole other world out there of people exploring and creating music and doing art, and that it turns out the universities do not have a monopoly on creativity. And now I think it's gotten so much better for people because we have things like the Flutarians, we have things through the internet. Now we suddenly, the young music lover has just a wide array of choices to to expand their mind and to get the ideas and the inspiration and the guidance and the knowledge that they need to create a really enjoyable music practice in their life. But you might have, it sounds like you also had an interesting journey in having to discover some of those things for yourself.
Oh yeah. Well, I was just reviewing your book a little bit this morning since it's been a few days that I started, and on page 3, you mentioned 5 different groups of people that have a dysfunctional relationship with music, and I thought, one of these reminds me particularly of UNT. I'll just read that for our audience. Children who love music but hate music lessons, music theory professors who have never actually created any music, brilliant classical musicians who are intimidated by just a friendly jam session, jazz improvisers who can't play simple pop songs by ear, and concert pianists who can't play Happy Birthday without sheet music. Now, when I read this morning, I read it with new eyes, the section jazz improvisers who can't play pop songs by ear. And I thought back to my experience at UNT, and I remembered, oh yeah, that's right. Some of these cats who would whoop my butt on saxophone, I would ask them to play along with me to the radio, and they would balk. And I didn't understand. So I I noticed that um, you're trying to show a different path, and I want to almost call it a broad path because so many different people find their way to your book, right? And your programs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And none of that is intended to be a condemnation or a criticism of anyone. And we have to also remember that alongside those five characters that you just mentioned, there are also lots of people enjoying a very rich and full and beautiful music practice in their lives. So it's the point of that little passage is not to suggest that that's the only thing that our education system is producing. The point is actually very confessional, that actually all five of those people are myself.
Right.
That's what I was and have been for a lot of my life. And in speaking about these things honestly, I think one of the things that one of the sad things that happens when you find yourself in one of those categories is something that's deeper than music. It's not even really about your musical ability. It's about this feeling that you're an imposter. Imagine the experience of someone who is maybe a professional orchestra performer or a professional music teacher having to live with kind of the fear of being called out at a family gathering and having someone say, "Hey, why don't you play along?" and being exposed, right? That you wouldn't be able to do that. Now, that's not a reason to study music. We should, everything should start with accepting ourselves and being grateful for our lives and loving ourselves. But it is, to me, in my life, it was just kind of a sign or a symptom of a longing for a more real relationship with music, which it could be quite simple. It doesn't mean being able to do everything with everyone at every jam session in the world, but I wanted a real connection with music such that I could understand when we hear those simple pop songs on the radio, I could understand what those sounds are. I could work with those same sounds myself. I could write a song like that myself. I could improvise I could express those beautiful sounds when I'm playing, the same way you can hear them in your mind and you could sing them. I wanted to play them on, in my case, it was the guitar and later the trumpet. In your case, maybe it's the flute. And so, you asked about my origin story. So first, when I was a little kid, I was fortunate to be exposed to music in a lot of different ways. I had a very rich musical childhood. Looking back, my dad was a jazz trumpet player, so going to his gigs and jam sessions with him, I got exposed to that whole world of jazz musicians. And then in school, I played in the marching band, I played in the jazz ensemble, I sang in the choir. I did a lot of things that probably many of your listeners have also done. Then because I played guitar when I was a teenager, this was back in the 1980s, so there was these heavy metal guitar gods, and I became kind of fascinated by all that. And so I had a rock band and we played cover tunes. And then pretty quickly I got a really wonderful opportunity to play in a jazz quintet. mostly older guys. Everybody in the band was better than I was. But that band played a lot. It was a steady gig. To this day, it's like the best gig I've ever had. It was every Friday and Saturday night for 4 hours. And that lasted like 2 years while I was still in high school. It was an amazing gig. We just played standards from the real book. And so all of this was quite exciting and fascinating to me. And it also motivated me then to study music a lot. And so I was studying every bit of music theory I could get my hands on. I was transcribing solos, whether it's rock solos or jazz solos. I was just doing everything I could to try to understand all this stuff. And the way that I would describe it to you is that everything I was studying, it was a lot of information, but it was all on the surface. I didn't have any real core understanding of how all this stuff fits together and how it connects to my ear. And so the only way I could describe it is like, imagine if you had to walk from your house to your local grocery store, but you have no map, so you have no idea how the neighborhood is laid out, and you have to do it blindfolded, so you can't use your eyes. And so you think about how you could do that, and you start thinking about, the 10,000 actions that you would have to memorize to be able to do that. Walk forward 2 steps, open the door, go forward 2 more steps, turn to the left, go forward 2 steps, walk down the stairs, right? Just millions of steps you'd have to remember. It's endless. And even if you were able to pull that off, if somebody were to interrupt you in the middle of that journey and say, hey, instead of going to the grocery store, let's go to the post office, you're stuck, right? You're out of luck. You have no ability to improvise. You can't go anywhere else, because as serious and dedicated as you are, the way you're approaching it is on the surface. And at that surface layer, that's where we find the 10,000 scales and chords and licks and patterns and formulas. And that's where all that information is, and which has a place. It's not bad information. But if that's all you have, then you go through life as an improviser with this experience of carrying with you just millions and millions of pieces of information that still don't really allow you to truly improvise. You still can't really go where you want to go. And so to me, the quest was always about, well, I didn't know there was a quest. I didn't know there was anything to understand. I just had a feeling. I just had a feeling that I didn't fully have the experience in music that I wanted to have. I didn't feel free. I didn't feel that I really understood everything that was going on around me. And it took me a long time to discover the simplicity of Western harmony, where all this stuff comes from. It really is just seeing clearly the key of the music and connecting that with your ear. And once you make that discovery, now it's like suddenly, going back to the metaphor of walking to the grocery store, now it's like somebody shows you a map of the neighborhood. So you can see where your house is, and the grocery store, and the park, and the post office, and the coffee shop. You can see it all. And then also you can take the blindfold off. So as you're walking around this beautiful neighborhood, you're also seeing and perceiving everything. You're enjoying all that richness and beauty, and you understand exactly where you are at every moment. This is exactly what we're doing in Improvise for Real. It's the only thing we're trying to do in Improvise for Real. So we're not in competition with the 10 million scales and formulas and all that content, all that superficial content. That's all. There's a lot of really valuable learning that you can get from that, and there are many other people developing that, and we don't need to redo any of that. But the piece that was missing in my life is the piece that I know is missing in many people's lives, and it's the only piece we're trying to provide, which is this core foundational understanding that then, okay, you see where you are in the key of the music. Everything is connected to your ear. Everything you hear, you know how to play it. Everything you can imagine, you know exactly where that sound is. And now you can bring back in the 10,000 bits of content, and each one of those things, you can study it and learn from it, but you can also see where it lives. You can see it in its proper tonal context. And so now we can have what I would consider a real relationship with all this stuff. So now I'm no longer just outside it trying to memorize the 10,000 steps. Now I'm inside this world, and I can go anywhere I want, And anything that you show me, I can now fit it into this worldview, and I can have a much more authentic relationship with all this stuff. That's kind of in a nutshell how my own struggles in music led to this longing for an understanding of what I keep calling the foundation of all this stuff, where all these sounds come from, which is so simple. It's ridiculous how simple it is and how many years it took me to even notice that. And that discovery was so exciting that that's what really propelled all the rest of the work that we're doing in Improvise for Real, just to try to share this with other people.
Mm-hmm. As you're describing your map and blindfolded metaphor, I'm channeling a pop movie reference of in the Matrix when Neo, I guess at the end somewhere, he's been blinded and then suddenly he can see, he can feel and see his whole environment. And I think that's a similar sort of experience as what you were describing of having the blindfold taken off and being shown the map. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even there was even a chapter in the book that I called "Seeing the Matrix" because that's exactly what it feels like when when you first. That's a pretty big realization when you discover just how much of the music that surrounds us in our daily lives is literally just the seven notes of the major scale. And it gets confused by the theory that we learn in schools because they teach us the way that a lot of mainstream music teaching works is either designed to, it's either optimized for analysis so that you can properly write down and categorize everything, or it's optimized for improvising. So you have some like ready-made strategies that you can just go forward and play these scales over these chords and it'll all sound okay. But what neither of those two things will give you is a holistic vision of this tonal landscape in which you can see how all these things fit together. You can see an entire composition in a single vision of what I call the tonal landscape. You could think of it as the key of the music, but it includes the notes outside the key of the music. But once you start orienting yourself to that and listening for that, and you realize that even these songs that sound like they're in a minor key, they're on this same landscape. It's just a different tonal center of the major scale. Maybe it's a different chord of the major scale. It's a minor chord, and so it creates that minor sound. But you start listening for these things, and you realize you can go hours and hours and hours listening to the radio, and song after song comes on, and you can't remember the last time you heard a note that was not just one of the seven notes of the major scale. And it's so easy. It's so easy to recognize melody notes by ear. And then because you're connected to that, you're oriented in the key of the music, you're hearing things that way. You can also recognize the chords by ear. And you can pick up your instrument, and with one test note, now you know where you are relative to that key, and you can improvise over this song, and you can play the chords, and you can play the melodies. All of that is 100% available to every human. If you love music, if you love the way these songs sound and feel to you, that means you're hearing them. You know, if I were to sing the melody to your favorite song, but I sing one of the notes out of place, I sing a wrong note, you would recognize it instantly. That means that your ear already knows exactly every single one of those pitches, which one it was expecting. And that means you can tell the difference. These notes are not all the same to you. Each one is unique. There's a unique beauty to each one. And so how do we come to learn that, though? How can I master all that? How can I come to know all of that? Well, that's what connects it back to the other point that you made. You use the word Zen. And it's not, it's something that's very, very much developed in a lot of Eastern teaching, but that's not the only place it's developed. It's also the way we learn everything else in Western society. If you want to learn to play tennis, you picture like a 5-year-old working with a tennis coach. There are going to be these very simple activities that we're going to repeat over and over again. You're going to get to know the basic elements of this, and you kind of learn how to hold it, and you're learning about your body and timing and movements and distances and all this. You want to learn computer programming. You're going to be in a programming class, and you get a very simple set of instructions. In the first class, maybe you only learn how to do 3 things, and now you have to write your own program to solve a problem with these 3 little commands that you've learned. So you're getting in there, you're working it with your hands, you're getting to know the stuff yourself, and this path has been laid out for you calmly. That's the key. That's the key. The thing that prevents people from really getting to know the sounds of our musical system. It's not that there are so many, but there are too many to really master in a single day. And so we have this fork in the road that we have to choose. I either learn about it all superficially and I get the rules and the formulas that allow me to play a bunch of stuff that sounds okay, or if I want a deeper and more um, a more I struggle for the words. If we want a genuine mastery of these sounds, so we actually know what they are and we can improvise our own melodies and we have total control over this tonal landscape. We can play any sound we want. We can recognize the sounds we hear. We need a path that allows us to get to know each of those sounds in an organized way. And that's the other thing that we're trying to provide with Improvise for Real. It's not just an attitude. It's not just, hey, let's study music in this more free and loving way. It's the journey of the 10,000 steps that allows you to get to know the first harmonic situation and the next and the next and the next. But every step of the way, you're exploring the sounds for yourself and you're developing that real personal relationship with the sounds, which, as we know from every other thing in life, we need these experiences in order to feel that confidence and to really understand the material.
Well, I wonder if a word that might also describe what you're looking for is foundational. Yesterday, when I was describing a few of these foundational topics to my students, I was searching for the right word too, and I settled on foundational in that, well, if you if you mas if you master the first, second, and third interval first, then you'll be ready to add the fourth and the fifth and the sixth and the seventh. And while there's only seven, I love what you just said there. It's it's just a little bit too much for one day. And I reading between the lines what I heard you saying on the topic of Zen and learning these foundational few blocks is that most adults in our society have a hard time slowing down enough to learn three notes or just three notes.
Absolutely. That's it exactly. That's it exactly. It's I think it's just really hard for most people to truly grasp how long they're going to be alive and how much time they have. And so you offer them what you're saying is, if you'll do this activity with me for a few hours, I can teach you to recognize the difference between notes 1, 2, and 3 of the major scale, right? The mind goes into a panic, right? What am I going to do with that? I don't have a whole day. I can't waste a whole day learning notes 1, 2, and 3. What are you talking about? I got to get back to my theory studies or whatever. But for the person that, for whatever reason, is blessed with the clarity to not give importance to those feelings of anxiety and to just go ahead and say, well, what else was I going to do today? I didn't have anything else going on anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and learn notes 1, 2, and 3. Now, oh my goodness, tomorrow, because we recognize notes 1, 2, and 3 like the back of our hand, if I introduce note 4, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. You're going to recognize it instantly because it's the one sound that doesn't belong. It's the one that we weren't studying yesterday, right? And so now I've got notes 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, mind you, going back to what we were observing earlier, that you can listen to the radio for hours and never hear a note that's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. Put that in context and now go back and remember the significance of what we are doing when we are finally clarifying. For once in our lives, we are finally clarifying the sound and the feeling of notes 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, in this example, I'm picturing sort of a major key where we're all feeling note 1 as a tonal center. It sounds like the Sound of Music, Do, a deer, and all that stuff, right? And that's only one of the harmonic situations that the world is going to present to us. And that's a good thing. It's lovely that the world of harmony is rich enough that we're not going to fully exhaust all the things to discover in just a couple days. It's wonderful that there's this beautiful, rich landscape of things to discover, but it is absolutely discoverable. Music is knowable. And so maybe you spend a couple weeks just really getting to clarity about the sounds of notes 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this context where we're feeling note 1 as the tonal center, or what people call a major key. Now we can add note 5. Okay. Now this is exactly what we do in IFR Sing the Numbers 1. This is literally what that audio course does, is it takes you through this process. But the ideal way to set all this up in your life is to also be exploring those sounds creatively at the same time, improvising with those 3 or 4 or 5 notes on your instrument over backing tracks. This is like the Zen experience where you're really getting your hands on it. You can explore them, you can explore these sounds, and you can play them in all different ways. And so that's a really important part of this, of understanding how to study music, is that what we're teaching people is not, learning to improvise is not just the goal of Improvise for Real. It's actually the method. It's a hugely important part of the method. You have to improvise with these sounds in order to get to know them and to come to feel some personal familiarity and relationship with these sounds. But if you do these things, I mean, how long can you give yourself to learn to really recognize the 7 notes of the major scale by ear in a major key, and to be able to play any melody you've ever heard in your life in any key on your instrument with those 7 notes? How long would you give yourself? Let's say it takes a year. Okay, we've got a year. Now in the second year, we can start looking at other harmonic situations, right? Minor keys, right? Let's say that takes a year. What are we talking about? You're still going to be here in 2 years. In a couple of years, you could have this completely integrated understanding of Western harmony, where you see the whole tonal landscape, you see how all the sounds fit together, it's all connected to your ear, you can recognize all this stuff when you hear it, you can compose, you can improvise, you can create your own music all day long with this stuff, but it requires an attitude of calm and self-acceptance and gratitude for the day, things that you associate maybe with Zen, or just any kind of, it's just a different learning philosophy. It's just a whole different belief about how we learn things. And it's different from the sort of authoritarian instructional, I'm going to tell you the 10,000 things to do. It's a learning method that is based on discovery, self-discovery and discovery of the sounds. And our job is to create a learning environment in which the child can discover. I mean, I say the child, all our students are adults, but if you think about that, if you think about the way little kids learn in kindergarten, that is a better model for learning music than the engineering courses at the college level.
Yeah, totally with you. I wish I had someone to draw me a comic right now of this conversation I've had many times, and I imagine you've had many times on some variation, where someone says, how do I improvise? And I say, you improvise. How do I do it? You do it. At its most basic level, that is the way to do it. I also often think of this moment in Star Wars with Yoda, where he says, "Do or do not. There is no try. You
Mm,
improvise or you don't." And but then
yeah,
you also have to, yeah, of course, there are tips we can give, like listen to your feed yourself, create this feedback loop. But
right,
yeah,
exactly. When people are resistant to that idea of just improvising, what they're trying to express is that they don't want to just be noodling around. They don't want to just play randomly. No matter how much we talk up that experience, it doesn't feel interesting and profound to them. That's not what they want. What they want is to be able to express themselves clearly and precisely. They want to be able to improvise melodically. And that doesn't take away the truth of what you're saying. It is still, the way to learn to do that is by doing it. It's by improvising. But it's very different to improvise with the lights on, where you can see the tonal landscape. You can see where you are in the key of the music. So when you play that beautiful sound,
mm,
it's not just any sound. It's note 6 of the key of the music. That's what note 6 sounds like. And when you play that other sound that was quite jarring, it's not just any sound. That's flat 6. That's the sound of flat 6, and it will always do that exact same thing for you for the rest of your life. In any key, when you play flat 6, you're going to find that sound right there. This is what turns the experience into something productive and meaningful. It's still your own personal exploration, but it's very different to be exploring a landscape with a map and with a mental container that allows you to remember the lessons that you're learning, these discoveries. What people are resistant to in the idea of just improvise is the frustration of not knowing where they are, playing some random note. Maybe it sounds okay, maybe it doesn't, but I can't do anything with that experience. I have nowhere to put it. And so what we believe is that our job is to give people the container, to show people where they are on that tonal landscape, but then to give them the space to explore and get to know each one of those sounds for themselves. My teaching cannot take away that the need for that personal discovery. The goal of our teaching is just to make that personal discovery possible.
Mm.
Hmm.
When I got your book and skimmed it when it first arrived, I felt a little bit of an experience of overwhelm of, oh gosh, how am I gonna consume all of this content in 6 weeks? And now, having said that, I did read it all in 6 weeks. For those of you who are going to go out and buy the book after this, don't feel compelled to read it from beginning to end, because in my experience, this is a book that could easily guide you for years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's not like a novel. It's not something to read, from cover to cover uh, on your nightstand. It's exactly what you said. There, maybe the first 10 pages or so, you'll read that straight through because that's setting up the whole paradigm, the whole mindset, understanding how we're going to practice music and why. But then as soon as you get to the first exercise, if you could get lost in that exercise, put the book down and forget about it for weeks, that would be wonderful. That would be a huge success. That's a victory because it means you got it. It means you through that exercise, you discovered something that is interesting and meaningful to you, and then you began the process of really exploring it, making it yours, getting it into your muscle memory, thinking about it, reflecting on it. That's the goal. It's really more of a guide to accompany your musical exploration at whatever pace you're going to move through these things. And our journey is not linear. Some people will, go forward a little bit and then they'll come back a little bit. I mean, there is no forward and back really because our understanding is always getting deeper. So like even today, I've been doing this
Mm.
stuff for 20 years, but there are times when I'm just practicing jamming at home, I might put on one of the very simplest IFR jam tracks that our beginning students are working with on the first day. But even though the jam track hasn't changed, I've changed, right? And so the things that I'm going to do in that experience are going to be different. There's always more I can explore. There's always more I can create. And so what we want is for this to all just feel like a beautiful creative play space. And
Hmm.
and our job is to make it logical to help you see how the ideas. So in order for you to be able to understand these things, there are other things you need to understand first. And that's why it's helpful if somebody can organize the sort of intellectual journey for you so that you can fit it all into a mental model that you can understand. But the creative possibilities of any of these things are just infinite. And so that's where you have to have your freedom to study what you want to study and explore the sounds you want to explore and jam over the backing track that you want to jam over today, whatever chords you're feeling motivated or attracted to today. That's your creative inspiration. That's where you're going to find your bliss. And so there has to be that element of freedom to it. That this is an art form. This isn't a skill like welding or flying an airplane or whatever. This is a vast art form, and we're not all trying to go to the same place. Every single person who plays music has different needs, different aspirations, different abilities. And this is what makes it all so beautiful, is that richness and diversity of the people expressing themselves through music. And so that also has to be possible. It has to be possible for people to take what they want to take from each experience and reflect on it and then go where they want to go. And so that's why I keep coming back to this metaphor of kindergarten, because our job is just to create that beautiful playground where people can understand the raw materials of music. They can play with them themselves. They can create whatever they want. But then you have to really be kind of hands off and respect the choices they make about what they want to do.
Hmm. I'm thinking of that phrase, creating a sandbox too, or a sandbox to play in. And I'm also thinking about my friend Sharon Smith, who is a pottery, she teaches pottery. And she has a special phrase that means messed up little things that her students bring to her sometimes. And I think about that phrase and when we have children in our lives who bring us their little art projects from kindergarten, and while it might go in the trash later, for now it's something that you cherish, even if it is kind of a messed up little thing. And
Hmm.
I know what I'm trying to culture is a safe space for people to take these baby steps, for it to be okay to stumble and be awkward sometimes, and the experience you're describing is idyllic, with the idea of being able to hear exactly what you hear in your mind and put it out onto your instrument. I can't do that with 100% accuracy rate, but I've learned how to take the accidents and turn them into art. And that's one of the skills that I'm trying to share with people that makes it fun in the playground. Sometimes I have this experience where I'm trying to guess the melody that's in my imagination, and it's like a divine accident. Something comes out that I didn't even plan for, and then I listen to it and I go, "Oh, that was kind of cool. Thanks, Holy Spirit," or whatever, little photon zapped me at that moment and made my fingers do that. So it's the only judgment that's passed is usually yourself judging yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. There's so many really interesting and beautiful things you touched on there. It does go quite deeply. It is about a lot more than music. It's about this whole, I mean, every conversation ultimately, if we talk about it long enough, we get to the meaning of life, right? Like, what is the meaning
Yeah.
of life? What is the purpose of all this? And in music, our whole idea of music has been so scarred by this kind of authoritarian um, prime directive that you must not make sounds that are displeasing to those around you, right? So our whole view of music as an art form is really so cheap. It's become, I mean, we think of music like a talent show, and oh, he's so
Mhm.
clever. Listen to the way he plays that whatever, right? But that's very limiting. It's very limiting on many levels, not just creatively, but even just on a human level, just as people. This performative idea, and it's easy to understand historically why music is so oriented towards this performative kind of talent show mentality, because sound does travel everywhere, and it is something we do in groups, and so it's just naturally a very performative art form, whereas painting or poetry, these are things that you can practice in solitude, right? So you have the absolute peace, the safe space you're talking about. Any painter can achieve that safe space by simply closing the door. A poet doesn't even need that much. A poet can have that safe space at a coffee shop because nobody knows what she's writing in her journal. And as musicians, we have to see clearly that we need that same safe space. If you want to discover something new about the sounds, you have to let go of the need to sound good, because you can't do both. I can give you one or the other. I can either play something
You're
that
so
sounds good,
right.
which I already know how to play, or I can explore this new sound that I'm not sure what I can do with it yet. But I can't explore and learn anything if you're going to be judging what I'm doing and saying, oh, that didn't sound very good. I don't want to hear that. And so, what we need is to be for ourselves. We need to be that loving parent that receives that messed up little thing, that little work of art, and says, oh my God, it's so beautiful because I understand what my daughter is trying to express through this little work of art. And so, of course, I want to put it on the refrigerator. And we need to be that for ourselves. We need to be compassionate about the things that we are trying to express through music. And we have to realize there is no danger here. We're just playing music. Nobody's going to die. Nobody's going to get hurt. It's we need a creative space in our homes that we can use as just a laboratory of sound, where here we can do anything we want to do, and it's not performative. It's our place to connect with the sounds, and it can be a healing place. It can be a very spiritual thing. Your music practice can be like a Zen meditation. It can be the most beautiful moment of your day. It should be the most beautiful moment of your day, because otherwise, why are we doing it, right? But it can also be a place of discovery and learning and growth. But we have to shed this fear of appearances, of judging ourselves, that I'm not good, that's not good enough. Well, that's not even useful. It's not even true. It's just not even a relevant observation to this process of discovery that we're trying to cultivate.
Wow. Yeah. I'm
I mean,
just
you
trying to
can't have
kind
it
of
both
sum
ways,
it
right?
up. Hmm?
A way to sum it up is that you cannot have it both ways. You cannot serve two masters. If you want to have a joyful, safe, loving relationship with music, you cannot also be performative and worried about how you look and how you sound. You just have to get rid of the vanity in order to receive this kingdom of joy that music can bring us to.
When you say that, I'm envisioning the safe practice room and the performance space. And I'm frequently in my life, music or not, anybody I interact with, I'm like, if the opportunity comes up for me to encourage them to sing in the shower or sing in the car, I'm encouraging them because those are our little safe spaces, right? And I know that, well, it's good for us in so many ways. But I've been able to bridge this gap between practicing improvising in the practice room by myself and practicing in the practice room improvising with a couple of friends to performing and having very low anxiety about it usually. And so I'm wondering, other than exposure, what normally helps people bridge that gap?
Wow, that's a great question. It's a deep question. And again, I don't think it comes from music. Um, But let's just develop that idea a little bit more, because that's a very useful idea. The safe space of the practice room, and then the performance space. There's an implicit assumption there that when we are on stage, well, that's where we do have to take care to sound good, right? Now, I think that a really great direction that we could all strive for, is to first cultivate that absolute safety of the practice space, which is a place of self-acceptance and gratitude, and try to bring that with us to the performance space. So imagine what that would feel like. Imagine what it would feel like to be on stage in front of an audience and to make yourself vulnerable by, in that moment, behaving in exactly the same way you behave in your totally safe practice space. That would require a lot of trust. You'd be putting your heart in the hands of your audience, saying, I trust you. I'm going to share myself authentically with you. And I'm going to just play exactly what I want to play as the things occur to me. I'm going to express myself honestly with no masks, no filters, and I'm just going to be totally vulnerable. Imagine not only how beautiful that would be for you, but how awesome that would be for an audience. In a world that is so craving that reality, that real human connection, imagine how great that would be for an audience. Now, coming down from that ideal, you could imagine approaching it where you do have that safe space in the practice room, but then when you're on stage, you put up all the masks and all the shields, and you try to make sure everything you play sounds perfect.
Hmm.
And there's actually a level below this, which is where so many people are stuck at, which is that they take the phoniness and the stress and anxiety of the performance space and they bring that into their practice space. So even when they're in their own home, in the practice room, they bring all the judgment and all the fear and all the vanity that they would be experiencing on a stage. And what I'm saying is that we've got this backwards. The direction is the other. And if you think back to the music performances that have most touched you in your life, I'll bet they were the ones that were the most emotionally raw and vulnerable, and not the ones that were the most perfect and clever. The fact is, a lot of
Oh
musicians
yeah.
want to sound perfect and clever, but the fact is, nobody cares. You go and you play, and everybody's going to say, yeah, that sounded great. Wow, he's really good. But then they don't come back next week, right? And so when you ask what
Yeah.
makes that possible, what makes it possible for people to open up and trust and share themselves honestly, I don't think it really comes from musical skill. I think it comes from just thinking deeply about this problem and following it all the way to the end and convincing yourself that actually that makes a better performance than playing perfectly.
You did a really good job of elaborating on that. Um, I've I've been creating some little one-liner things to post on this topic of humility and confidence in improvising and how they're kind of related, almost like two flip sides of the same coin. And I have discovered in my own journey, and also in my journey of talking with other people, that bridging that gap from practice room to performing is really more of like a psychological journey than a technical journey. Technical like fingers in the flute or the embouchure or fingers in your guitar or whatever. Um, and what you were saying. I think was profound, and I don't want to just let it float away because I think that a lot of classical performers are looking for that ease and that expressiveness, and they're kind of coming up against a big wall of technique and how to's. But you're saying, well, it starts in appreciating your own sound, exploring your own sound, building confidence in what you want to express. And one of the things that I've noticed that practicing improvisation a little bit helps classical players with is recover from mistakes. And when we
Mm,
watch classical music, part of the thrill of it is knowing that the goal is to play it 100% perfectly, and that almost never happens. But when we get to see someone make a little mistake or something in life happens, the air conditioning comes on, blows the music off, or whatever, they're able to recover faster and faster if they've been
mm,
practicing improvisation.
mm.
Um, Gosh, there was another way I was going to tie it all together from my perspective too, but it's almost like when you have a fully free improvisation, when you're just improvising, you're not playing from music. It's like taking those little moments where you're recovering from an accident and making the whole thing that moment. And
Mm.
so if we find that little glimmer of authenticity exciting in classical music, how much more authentic is it when someone comes up on stage and from beginning to end, it's basically improvised?
Yeah. Yeah. The wonderful thing that people with a classical background often bring with them is a very beautiful sound, the ability
Sure.
to produce a beautiful sound on their instrument. And what what's so unfair is that so many of them, if they've had any exposure at all to improvising, it was all wrong. They were thrown into a chord progression that was way too complicated for them. They were given tips and strategies and formulas that do not feel authentic and have nothing to do with actually composing, with truly improvising melodically. And so they weren't set up to have an experience that was going to be in any way positive or illuminating. And so what this then also does is it triggers an unfortunate thing that many classical players have, which is sort of a lifetime programming of how shameful it is to make a mistake or to play badly or to look worse than the next guy, right? And so it's really just a very toxic mix. Um, and to come out of all of that, I think requires a lot of courage and a lot of trust. But I think on our end, those of us who are inviting classical musicians to improvise, it is also upon us. It's our responsibility to give them a better experience this time. And for me, that better experience is, okay, let's pick a key. Let me give you a backing track that has a couple chords going on. So there are two very beautiful chords alternating in the background, but you don't have to know what they are because both of those chords come from this key. And what that means is that all of the notes of this key are going to sound gorgeous all the time. Okay? So there are no rules. There's no trying to guess what the chord is and I got to land on a chord tone. No, the way we're going to start this is you pick any one of those 7 notes and you play it. And you play it as beautifully as you know how to play it from all those years of classical study. Just make a beautiful sound, just one beautiful sound. And then just listen to it and let it inspire you. Let it tell you whether you feel like moving down in the scale or moving up in the scale. And just see if you can connect with that freedom to move around in this tonal space, taking care of your sound, because I understand that's important to you. You want to play a beautiful sound. But no formulas, no tricks, no dirty tricks here. We're not going to change the key on you. We're not going to throw you in. We're not going to ask you to play bebop licks or anything else. It's just, can we connect with that basic, all that lovely harmony that we hear in Mozart and that we hear later in, romantic music, right? Just that, right? We're not talking about John Coltrane. It's not that. It's just like a lullaby, a children's song, just these gorgeous melodies that weave their ways through the chords, If we could just be in that space, but compose those melodies ourselves, going wherever we want to go. Most classical musicians, if they can have that experience, they're hooked. They're gone. You'll never see them again. They're just gonna take the whole journey and they just cannot stop improvising because they love music so much. Think about how much you have to love music to dedicate your entire life to it when you haven't even been given the keys to create it yourself. And then imagine handing somebody the keys to that Lamborghini. They've got this Lamborghini, right? This amazing
Yeah.
ability to produce beautiful sounds on their instrument. And now suddenly they can go anywhere they want. I mean, it's life-changing. It's the most thrilling thing in the world for the music lover.
I love talking to you about this because you've seen so many more people than I have go through this journey
Yeah.
of unlocking it. I'm curious. I kind of have two questions floating in my mind that might be related. The answer might be related. One is, what was the biggest challenge for you trying to put this in text? And two, what has it been like talking to a mix of monophonic instruments like flutes and polyphonic instruments like guitars and pianos?
Hmm. Um, the biggest challenge in putting it in text is not so much about the music exercises. When you really, it took me many years of working with private improvisation students of all instruments. I have a lot of experience teaching musical improv to all different kinds of instruments, right? And so that helps. I did that for a lot of years, and it was over the course of those years that the method really came into being. And it came into being very honestly, because when I started out, I didn't know how to teach harmony in this way. It was just my attempts to try to convey to a student some of the things that I had discovered and I had seen. And then, so, they don't understand it. So we get out a piece of paper and next thing you know, we're drawing numbers on the paper and we're putting little circles on things. And so the method evolved in this collaborative kind of environment, with the input of the students. But then when you just think about things sort of reasonably, okay, so how does a new person come to understand all of this? It's not hard. I mean, you can kind of organize the method in a day, just seeing like, okay, this is a journey that it goes out infinitely into the future, but these are the things that everybody needs, and this is the foundation that we should build first, and then we can bring in this other idea that makes it a little more open, a little more abstract, and then we show them where they can go in this direction or that direction. Organizing the world of harmony into a series of experiential exercises where a person can actually get to know this stuff in progressive stages is not that hard. It's not hard. The hardest thing is, what do you say about this? How do you describe what it is we're trying to do to a person who is skeptical about it, has no idea what you're talking about, doesn't even believe that some of these skills exist, certainly doesn't believe that they're learnable, may have massive misconceptions about themselves, all kinds of fears and anxieties and hangups, and realize that, even in this conversation, my biggest challenge is I tend to over explain everything. I get excited about stuff and I can't stop talking about it. And you cannot do that in a book. And so, how do you figure out what do you put on the first page that can send that message in a bottle to that person who needs it? What do you say first? What do you say second? How do you make them believe in it and believe in themselves and get a vision of how they could do this? That was the hardest thing. I mean, I'm not a writer. I never thought I was going to write a book. It was just, I just spent a lot of time trying to figure out a book because I wanted to share with other people the joy of being in this place, of being able to enjoy creating music. And we keep coming back to really one of the most important things about it, which is I think that if you're learning any of this to be performative, if your end game is, then I'm going to be on a stage and I'm going to play well, I'm going to improvise well, and people are going to love me, you're missing out. You're missing out, because that pleasure of people saying, wow, Vic, you just played a great solo, that pleasure is nothing compared to the pleasure, the bliss that you feel expressing yourself authentically through music. Just improvising itself is one of the great pleasures of life. And it's free. This is something we should be sharing with everybody who knows how to play an instrument. And it's not so they can perform for their friends. It's so they can get the joy, the pleasure, the excitement of it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember something else I was going to say a moment ago about this experience of making a mistake publicly and the joy of being supported by your listeners. But one of my favorite environments to play improvised flute music in sometimes is kirtans, and kirtan is like we'll sing chants usually in Sanskrit, and they have a very simple, peaceful, joyful meanings, and I play very simple lines along with it. But sometimes there will be these moments where, okay, it's time for a flute sparkly shine solo moment. And of course, every once in a while, some little thing that I perceive as a mistake will happen. But the thrill of knowing that I can make it over any speed bump and that people will be there with me throughout it and they're appreciating it along with me, that is more exciting to me than memorizing a very complicated classical piece and performing it 99%, 100% correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's more authentic.
Isn't that interesting? And you can bring that perfectionism that I think in this last explanation, you're relating that to like playing a classical piece. There are people who bring that perfectionism and that very same mindset to improvising. There are people who play a jazz improvised solo with the exact same sort of shields up, as I keep saying, as if they were performing a classical piece. It's all about playing it perfectly. And we do this out of fear, but it's such an amazing, life-changing discovery to realize that it's actually more exciting and more joyful to improvise for real, to actually put yourself out there, and you don't know what you're going to play next. You don't know what your mind is going to come up with. You don't know how you're going to resolve this phrase. To be truly improvising and open to that stream of ideas, right? And so it's never going to be as perfect as something that you could sit and compose for 6 months. Now, if you practice all the formulas and the patterns and you do the bebop licks, you can make something that sounds perfect, even though it's improvised. But I think you're missing out on just a world of creative possibilities. It's easy to improvise scales and formulas and make it all sound correct, but you miss out on the excitement of going out into the darkness and truly not knowing what you're going to play next, and then listening to your own imagination for the sounds, which can take you to a bebop phrase, but it can also take you to a romantic phrase. It can take you to something that sounds like something you've heard in Indian classical music. When you're listening to your own imagination, everything becomes possible. And what's I think also important to realize here is that this basic principle of improvising for real, um, it doesn't really come from music. It also comes from just human connection. The exact same is true about just having a conversation. That if we get together and I tell you all my prefabricated stories about how I'm doing and what's going on, I can come away looking like I'm perfect, right? My life is going perfectly. I said a bunch of stuff, I made some witty jokes, I came across looking very clever. But in my heart, I am dying of loneliness because I never actually shared with you what I'm actually
Mm,
feeling, what I'm actually thinking, right? And so I used to play with a singer who taught me that. We used to do these duo gigs of just guitar and voice, and he was a very operatic kind of singer, and he sang in a very just a very emotionally moving way, in a way that felt to me very vulnerable. And I just never forget a comment that he made. Is that he said that, what we're doing is actually a kind of social therapy, because if people come here and they see me exposing myself, making myself vulnerable with no mask, and I even let them hear my imperfections. So even when I sing a note and it's a little out of tune, or I sing a note and it's a little bit broken, right? They hear that struggle in my voice, they leave thinking that, maybe I don't need to put so much effort into maintaining my mask either. This guy just made himself totally vulnerable in front of me. Maybe I could relax a little bit too. And so that's really the context in which all this is taking place. We're talking about music, but a lot of the barriers that we're facing to receiving the joy of music have more to do with a kind of psychological orientation in life and social fears that we have been programmed with.
mm. You're going deep there, David.
Mm,
Yeah. Well, I when you talked about people who have their canned responses for a conversation and they go home feeling, oh well, I didn't really share anything of myself. I realized, oh right, in my life when I gained comfort with improvising, it in music, it transformed my ability to relate to people in verbal conversation too, because I became a better listener.
mm,
They're one and the same almost.
mm.
And I I wanted to mention a story from earlier in my life and also a phrase that I've recently learned. The story is just that at some point in my life I had an experience I'm sure someone watching it this at some point has had where I went home for Christmas and my family asked me to play along with Christmas tunes and I froze. And they're like, "What, Vic? You almost have a degree in music. You ought to be able to do this." And I went home and I was disappointed that I missed out on that opportunity to bond with my family. And the next
Mm,
time I went back, I was able, I had crossed that bridge. And I'm so glad because my family doesn't care if I play a wrong note on Frosty the Snowman. They don't
mhm.
care.
Right.
And this phrase that I recently learned from the psychology world is the fear of being perceived. And when I heard someone else talking about it, I thought I have that. And I thought maybe it was just about talking. I thought, oh, maybe my mom eavesdropped on me too much when I was in high school or something, or I don't know. Um, but now that I'm talking with you, I realize that it is also probably from as a classical musician, this idea of, well, we can't practice in total silence like a poet. And in music school, there's almost always someone there to say, "Oh, David didn't play that right." Oh, you know, we're most of us growing up don't actually have the luxury of a totally private practice room. As
Yeah.
adults, many of us don't.
Yeah.
Um, and so if you're an adult and you have the fortune of a good fortune of a totally private practice room, then you're in the situation of your own internal family parts. Catherine Warbianski was saying the other day, you got your internal parent and your little kid and your bully and your worst critic, all of that. Well, you got to realize all those people are in the practice room with you, but those are the only people that are in the practice room with you. There's no one else there to bully you, or if there are other people who can hear you because you're in a practice room where there's people down the hall or whatever, well, how realistic is it that you're going to actually be harmed or your feelings are actually going to be harmed by that person? And
Yeah,
are,
yeah,
are
yeah.
are we are we grown up enough now to care for ourselves when it does hurt our feelings? Because
Right, right, right.
most musicians you got to be sensitive to be a musician.
Absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. But we can also reframe it, putting together a couple of things that you said. You observed how your music practice has even had an impact in the way you relate to other people, right? And then you hit on something very concise and very brilliant, which is the fear of being perceived, right? Which is what's running through all this, underlying everything we're talking about. It all comes down to that, right? But we do not need to overcome that in order to have a productive music practice. We can think of our music practice as the place where we work on that. Our music practice can be our
Mm-hmm.
therapy where we
Mm-hmm.
confront these issues. I practiced Aikido for a lot of years, and one of the things I loved that my teacher used to say is that Aikido doesn't make you a better person. It gives you a mirror to help you kind of understand where you're at today. And we don't have to be perfect people to play music. Our music can be healing. It can make us better people. It can make us happier people. We can go into the practice room with this mission, with these ideas in mind, that it's not about perpetuating the toxic anxiety of having to play perfectly. It's the worst thing we could do in the practice room. The best thing we could do in the practice room is to use it as a place to practice a new way of being, the way we want to go through the world, the kind of person we want to be. And if we want to be charitable to others, we have to be charitable with ourselves. And that means we have to let go of these fears and the vanity and think of it as more than a music practice. It can be a very spiritual practice. It should be. It should be. Music can be absolutely the most healing thing in your life. For some people, it's exercise. For some people, it's the martial arts. For some people, it's their religion. Music can be that meditative, holistic practice that makes us better in every aspect of our lives. But we just have to choose to make it that.
Mm. Which involves time blocking on a simple scale. Well, I want to give the chance for our viewers to drop any questions in the chat if they have them. I wanted to give you the chance to talk to us a little bit about your programs other than your book as well, because I've noticed you've got an active YouTube channel and you've got several video courses as well. There's one that just started this week or this today that's recognizing chords by ear, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a 10-week workshop that we're doing, which has video lessons and practice tracks and self-tests and all that, but also the personal coaching, and also the relationship with everybody in the community. It actually technically started a couple days ago, but if people would like to join, there's still plenty of time ahead of us. We're still doing the first lesson right now. It was just published a couple days ago. We'll be working on that for a week. And you can find that at improviseforreal.com. But that's just like a one-time thing. What we're doing beyond that is going back to a question that you asked earlier about the challenge of trying to teach for both polyphonic instruments
Mm.
and melodic or monophonic instruments. And yeah, in the book, all I can really do is talk about. The book was really kind of written for melodic instruments because it's something everybody can do. So it describes a practice and a way that we can explore harmony through melodic playing, um, with some ideas about how guitarists and pianists might also explore bringing these sounds together. But what we're doing now is we're creating video courses for all the different instrument families where we can fully develop these ideas. And so we're going to have, within just a few months now, we're going to have a complete video course for piano, a complete video course for bass. I'm redoing my whole series of video courses for guitar. We're going to have a line of video courses for melodic instruments. And so finally we can address some of these unique opportunities that the different instruments present. And that's our biggest focus. That's really what we're working on at this point. We're going to have the next couple of years going to be pretty intense of just creating video courses that bring together all the different practice tools and backing tracks and give people that unified path through this beautiful world of harmony in a way that they can explore it for themselves.
I'm curious if when you published the book in 2011, if you were already making video courses to accompany it.
No, no. I always felt that we were going to do that. just because of the kind of thing that music is. It's so
Right.
important to be able to see it and hear the notes and all that kind of thing. But we didn't have that in the beginning. For the first couple years, all we had was a little ebook and one beginning collection of backing tracks, and I mean, all this is just so much work that it's taken us a long time to fully build out a learning environment that I think people deserve. And that's been one of the hardest things, is to see clearly what we should have, but it just takes a long time to get there.
Mm. Well, I'm so pleased to see that you're continuing to build it out and that you've got lots of fans because I can only reach so many flute players, right? And it's you're doing some of the work of educating the rest of the players in the world so that I have more people to improvise with.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're part of it. You are part of an amazing moment in history where we have this
Mm.
incredible gift of music that that everybody loves. It's the art. It's the most popular art form in the world. You go to any country in the world, and almost everybody loves music. It's so much more universally embraced and enjoyed than something like sculpture, right, or poetry or whatever.
That's a great
Um,
point.
and the barrier to entry, what people need to really understand in order to enjoy the thrill of creating their music, is actually very little. And so it's mostly just a different set of values that the world needs. Somebody like yourself who cares about helping people to be happier in their lives. It's not about identifying the one talented kid that we can use in an orchestra someday to make some money. It's not about that. It's about the musician being the end goal. It's the life of it's enriching the life of the musician, giving that human an exciting, beautiful, joyful thing to celebrate and enjoy every day. You're absolutely part of that. And there are a lot of people who have the music knowledge and the technical skills that they could be part of it, but they're just not quite there yet, kind of philosophically. And so it's really a pleasure to talk with you and to know about your program. And I think it's really exciting that we're not the only ones. We're not alone in this. There are a lot of people now that are seeing this opportunity and seeing there's something really beautiful we could do here.
Mm. Well, I appreciate you recognizing me in that way. And I've had the good fortune of developing that classical tone, and I can bring that beautiful classical tone when I improvise. But I want to be clear to all of my flute players who are watching, you don't have to already have developed this beautiful, perfect classical tone to start improvising. You can start improvising on day one. And actually, tomorrow on Tuesdays, I've been hosting some group flute improv games where we can take some baby steps together, share some ideas, maybe polish some tricks that you can use. And I want to invite y'all to come join me there. The details are in the Flutarians group. We don't have any questions in the chat, just a couple of thank yous for joining us. I want to thank you again personally for taking the time to have this fascinating conversation with me. I hope we get to have another one sometime in the future. And yeah, did you have any other questions before we move on
Yeah, I
with
just
our
I just wanted to
melodies?
make sure I get the wording correct on that really beautiful idea you shared about, was it the messed up little thing? Is that the right
Oh,
word?
well, chingaderas, yes, which means fucked up little things.
Okay, I think I'll stick with the English variant of it. But I'm going to carry that image away from this conversation.
Hmm.
I think a really interesting thing to think about is imagine reframing every single thing you do in your life as one of these messed up little things,
Hmm.
including this conversation, everything I'm saying, everything you're saying, that note you played on the flute. You're talking about people who, you know, aren't aren't able to produce the sound they want to produce on their flute. That never ends. That never ends. The
Hmm.
whole secret here is to embrace that magic of the messed up little thing. And if you can learn to enjoy doing that messed up little thing, well, then all the doors open.
Hmm. And I don't frequently talk about the spiritual side of it, but for me, it is a spiritual communication thing of sometimes these ideas I'm receiving musically, it feels like they came from God or the Holy Spirit or the hive mind or the higher mind. And when I offer them up, it's like a communication with that with the universe. So
Yeah,
it's a circular
absolutely.
thing.
Absolutely. That's the experience.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining me, David. Thanks to my viewers. I'll see y'all next time.
Thank you very much, Vic.